I was on the phone with my brother Rock earlier today, and we were talking about the oddities and the oddness of this last year and a half now, going on 2 years, and how little kids' lives must be so different from our own experience, and even though some degree of their schooling has gone back to normal, the year spent with remote learning, the concerns, the struggles, the ebb and flow of society because of fear, and I laughed and said, it's so different, like we didn't even wear seatbelts. And my brother Rox laughed, he said, we didn't even have seatbelts. And it made me think of our neighbors, Sally Cusick, who ordered an International Harvester van for her family, but it took a few extra weeks to come because she wanted seatbelts. And we all thought she was weird. But we live in a world where there is so much confusion, so much difficulty, still so much hardship surrounding the virus and the impacts it's had on our economic cycles and our well-being. And I was wondering whether this year, when people could travel for Thanksgiving, they would in fact do so. And as of a couple weeks ago, it was turning out to be the most heavily traveled Thanksgiving ever. That people, perhaps in the midst of whatever hardship they may be experiencing, come to a deeper realization of that for which they are thankful, that for which they want to give their time and their energy to be with family and friends, and to just count in simple ways around a table sharing a meal, count their blessings. I remembered vividly the emotions around going to my own grandmother's house. We didn't live that far from my grandmother, but with old cars and big families and not much money, we didn't see each other much. Twice a year, once we went down to them for Thanksgiving, and once a year my grandparents in May would come up to see us. But I'll never forget the excitement of Wednesday afternoon, getting off from school. School would end at noon, and already for a day or two, we would all be excited. We couldn't wait to pile into the car and take the long drive. It seemed like forever. It was probably about 4 hours. It's now 2, but it was 4. And just anticipating seeing Graham and Daddy Ray, as we called them, to smell their house, to be there, to see the pies that were ready for the next day, to experience all of that feeling of joy. And I suddenly was filled with that sense when we would leave on Sunday afternoon. We would leave their driveway and go one house down and cut around the block, and my grandparents lived on the second story of their two-flat, and they'd still be standing on the porch waving goodbye, and that sense of tightness in my chest because I so loved being there, so enjoyed being with them and loved my family with them, and it was real heartache of having to separate once again. It's that kind of feeling, that kind of emotion that so many people experience around Thanksgiving, and everyone's family is different and everyone's celebration is different. But it is a time sometimes filled with trepidation because of hardship in a family and arguments, but also we're going to make it work, being a primary feeling even in those families. We are a church of Thanksgiving. Our Eucharistic celebration means thanksgiving. We gather weekly and some of us daily to call to mind the many gifts we have received from Christ, the way God has loved us through Christ, and the Spirit we've received as a gift from the Father and the Son, to be people who live joy and gratitude. It's not always easy to do so, but it is important that we stop every time we celebrate the Eucharist, to be mindful of that which we bring ourselves, to enter into the meal, to enter into the sacrifice, so that we can receive from the table the strength, the sustenance, and the hope that will guide us back out into the world, back out into our lives, and back into the reality of being Christ for one another. There's a story that's been popular in the newspapers for the past couple of years, and it is of an accidental family. A woman in 2016 texted a teenage boy. She sent the text, as many people of our age do, to the wrong number and invited the wrong person to dinner. He showed up, and he's been coming ever since. They wouldn't have dinner without him. Last year, they couldn't have dinner because of COVID. This year, her husband has passed away because of COVID, but he was there. He will be there again. Because sometimes the families we celebrate with are not our natural families. They're the people who get us through. They are the men and women of our lives. Sometimes we gather by happenstance. Sometimes we gather with a deliberateness. Sometimes we gather with family and friends, but we gather, just as we do each time we gather around the altar, to give thanks to God for the blessings we've received, and to ask for the continued strength to go on in our journey through life. So today we pray in a special way for our Notre Dame students here in Dublin who can't be with us here tonight, who will not be sharing their meal together tonight. We pray for them. We pray for their families who may be watching from home. We pray for all of our families, our natural families, and those who help us get through. And we thank God for the gifts of all that we've received, the blessings of our lives. We ask for the strength to be blessings for one another and for every person we encounter.